am happy to join you today, and thank you for making the time to talk with us this afternoon about our work related to the Every Student Succeeds Act and our recent stakeholder focus group focusing on how we can best support excellent educators. My name is Amy Maestera, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent here at osse for elementary, secondary, and specialized education. We're going to give folks a couple more minutes to jump on because we do have several folks registered who are in schools, so we're going to give them a chance to log in, and we'll get started shortly. Okay, we see that some additional folks are logging on, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, we're here today to talk with you about a recent focus group we held at osse regarding the Every Student Succeeds Act. And I am going to get started and then turn it over to my colleague Itai Mizrav, who will share with you some of the feedback we received at the session. Throughout the webinar, we're going to pause to give you a chance to share any comments or ask any questions. There is a question chat box that you should see. And we really encourage you to chime in, share any questions as we move forward. And then at the end of the session today, we will share with you some additional information about ways to provide additional input. Again, my name is Amy Maestera, and I'm happy to be with you today. We're going to dive into the content. All right, so I'm going to start by just giving you a big picture overview of the work and in particular how osse is approaching this work, which is the requirement under the reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Hopefully this will set the context for some deeper discussion as we move forward. So first, as we shared in the focus group itself, the in-person session, we highlighted the fact that we know that DC is making significant progress in the work of education reform, and you all know better than we do here about the hard work that goes into making that a reality. We've seen that there's some real points of pride for the district, and here are two that really reflect the work that has been going on year after year in DC. First, we know that more families are choosing public schools in both sectors, and this has been a consistent trend. So families are really putting their faith in us in terms of the public schools across the city. And the second is that when we look at our scaled score in terms of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP, we see again that we are year after year making steady progress. And when you look at this graphic, we're not quite at the national average yet, so we certainly have some work to do to meet it or exceed it, but you can see that we are accelerating the pace of our improvements. And this is just at the 4th grade level, reading and math. But you see the similar trends in other grades that are assessed. We also look at PARC, and we see some similar bright spots in the sense that when we look at year-to-year comparison, 2015 to 2016, we see improvement. On this slide, what you'll see here is the 5 levels of PARC on the left-hand side. DC, as you know, has determined that levels 4 and 5 are equated with college and career readiness for DC. So the light and dark green components of each of the bars show how we're doing there. Again, there is a narrative of progress, but at the same time, as the slide indicates, we also know we have a lot of work to do. And both in English language arts and math, we see that overall about 25% of our students are considered college and career ready, which means that 2/3 are not there yet. So while we're making progress, we have a sense of urgency in terms of improving results. The goals of OSSE as an agency and under the leadership of Superintendent Kang are twofold. One is to continue to move toward being the fastest improving state and city, acknowledging our dual role here in DC in terms of academic outcomes and improvement in those outcomes. And the second is really related to equity, making sure that students who are furthest behind are well supported and specifically accelerating their progress. When we think about those goals and look at the data that we've just reviewed together, there's a really important opportunity here in terms of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and its reauthorization and the charge to states around the work. The ESEA's intent is to ensure that all children have a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education. So you see that that piece around equity and opportunity is central to the law. So as we think about the opportunity in DC, kind of where we are and where we need to go, we have some critical questions in front of us, and we also pose these to each of the focus groups that, and groups of stakeholders with whom we've been meeting. And there really are 3 key questions. First, how do we maximize the opportunities in the new, in the reauthorization of the law to meet our city's goals specifically? Second, how do we make the most of the funding flexibilities that are made available to us through ESSA? And then third, what policy levers exist that if we choose to operationalize them could accelerate our progress? I noted that we have an opportunity in terms of ESSA, and the immediate requirement for states is that states create a new state education plan under ESSA. So this slide gives you a very high-level view of the work underway in terms of the development of that plan. Again, thinking about our data and about the opportunities. What should we be prioritizing in the plan? What decisions should be made in terms of those decision points that the reauthorization makes possible? We are working very hard at making sure that we create a plan that makes sense and has meaning for DC, and also that the plan is submitted by March of 2017. Currently, the Department of Education provides states with 2 opportunities or time, 2 deadlines to choose from in terms of submitting the plan. One is in March and one is in July. And the superintendent and others agree that if we wait until July to submit the plan for approval, given that most of the requirements of the plan go into effect for this upcoming school year, 2017-18, the July submission date would be too late to make sure that we're prepared for implementation. So we're working toward the March deadline at this point, and you can see here that there's been a lot of work started and underway. I want to point out that there are 2 opportunities for public input. The first is right now during the month of October. where we have created different focus group opportunities, in-person webinar, and other types of engagement where we're having direct conversations with people who are impacted by the plan and also have a real understanding of what needs are in terms of moving the work forward. We have 2 surveys that are open this month as well, and we'll give you more information about how to access those. And we're reviewing that data on a rolling basis. So October is really that first window of initial input. Then you're taking part in that right now. The second opportunity is once we draft the plan based on all of the input received and decisions made, we will be posting the plan for public comment in January. And during that 30-day posting period, we will also be meeting in each of the communities in DC with our State Board of Education colleagues to review at a high level the content of the plan and encourage public comment. So there are those 2 windows that I want to highlight, and we hope you'll take advantage of both. At this point, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions about that kind of framing that I've done, and then I'll be turning it over to my colleague Itai to delve a little more deeply into the content of the focus group.
Sorry, everyone, I was speaking to myself while being muted. My name is Itai Mizrav. I'm the Manager of Education Policy and Compliance for elementary and secondary here at osse. And I will do a deep dive with you into the issue of supporting excellent educators with regard to the state plan in ESSA and in general. As Amy was just saying, feel free to utilize the chat function in this webinar. It should be available and it should be able to see what you guys are saying. We definitely want to answer questions today, and I know that many of the participants here didn't get the opportunity to participate in the meeting we had last week, and that's exactly why we're doing this webinar. So feel free to stop us, ask questions as we go along, and use that feature. All right. So a few goals for today's session. Today I would like again to provide some information about the key provisions of the law, the key changes that are happening in ESSA, and I think there are some very good changes and exciting opportunity that we can be thinking about together. I'd like to examine opportunities in the law that would allow us to accelerate our progress, and there is a lot of them. I'd like to discuss some of the community's priorities with you, and you being the community. We want to hear from you what is important as we think about this important step forward. I want to inform the focus of the new state education plan, again, based on our conversation today. It's a fantastic opportunity. And I'd like to share with you the feedback that we received on that meeting in October 18th, and hear whether you agree with that feedback or whether there's anything you would like to add to it, to that in this conversation. So on October 18th, we met with teachers from different sectors, with TCPS and Charter LEA representatives, with directors of recruitment and professional development and curriculum. We also had TMTP, who served as kind of the national experts in the room and enabled us to kind of get that important perspective. And then representative from the Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center the center that combines the work of several states in our region. They're able to kind of give us the perspective of how is our work looks like in relation to efforts that are happening in the region. And we had a discussion that will mirror the discussion we will have right now about the same topics. And we received some great feedback that we will share with you. But let me start just with kind of framing the conversation with really how important it really is. When we talk about the transition to ESSA, many times we talk about the accountability system and other parts that are very famous and we hear about them a lot. And sometimes we don't hear a lot about the issue of teachers, but actually the issue of teachers and leaders in ESSA has a lot of opportunities, and it also happens to be one of the most important topics we can talk about. We know that students for ineffective teachers get about a half a year worth of materials, while students of effective teachers, only one standard deviation above, usually get 1.5 years worth of material. So a whole years of difference. And when we talk about a city like Washington, D.C., and the achievement gap, it's important to remember that having a top performer teacher for 4 years can really close the black-white achievement gap, and that students with even only one highly effective teachers are more likely to graduate. So that's how important this issue of teachers really is. And that's why also when we look at our own data from Washington, D.C., it is so unacceptable and so frustrating to see that we still have those significant gaps in access to effective teachers. We see in the light blue schools that are not low income, and then in dark blue schools that are low income, and we see on the left how the access to highly effective teachers is much higher in those schools that are not low income. And that's, of course, something we want to change. To the very least, we would want that to be equal. We would want students that no matter which background they're coming from, to have access to effective teachers. It's so important because when we think about efforts like school improvement, things that we do around long school day, blended learning, small classrooms, how much can these efforts really be fruitful and effective if you don't have great teachers to carry them out? And those efforts are particularly aimed at those high-need schools, those schools that serve low-income populations, disadvantaged schools in general. And this is how important that is. And really, ESSA focuses on that question of equity, as I will explain in a minute. So that's why we think it's such an important opportunity. So let me start by going through the key requirements of the law. And I will stop at times and see if there are questions that we can make sure everything is clear. We would go in more depth and open a discussion in some of those areas that we identify as areas that require some additional consultation and some really major policy decisions like teacher qualifications and evaluations. But first, I'd just like to do a brief overview of kind of everything that we found around teachers and leaders in the new law that we think you all should know about. First of all, ESSA removes all federal requirements for teacher evaluations, but still requires LEAs and SEAs to do monitoring related to effectiveness, particularly that question about gaps, like this slide. We need to monitor whether students have equal access to effective teachers, but there are no particular guidance, federal guidance around teacher evaluations. That's a change from the ESCA waiver that we were under until August, that really had particular guidance, explicit guidance around what teacher evaluations should be. Right now, it's up to the state, and it's up to us to decide what and if there should be state-level teacher evaluation requirements, guidance, standards. Of course, once again, we are required to do a lot of monitoring, which leads me to the second point. There is an emphasis on equitable access. osse developed and was approved for a plan that we call it the Plan for Equitable Access to Excellent Educators. It was last year. Now that plan is part of the new ESSA law, and it requires states to report on whether students of low-income families and minority are disproportionately served by inexperienced, out-of-field, and ineffective teachers, and then what does the state do in order to deal with, to close these gaps? As you see on the sub-bullet, ESSA now also requires that LEAs do that same plan. And that's one of the questions that came up in the first focus group that we did. I saw that we have some DCPS representative here that represent large LEAs, but what about small LEAs in DC? And how would that apply to them, especially in cases where they serve, let's say, 100% of population that is low income? Would this apply the same way, and how should we think about that? And then osse must establish definitions for this plan for inexperienced, out of field, and ineffective. So we talked about ineffective, but we should also define again inexperienced, and then we should have a new definition for out of field, because for that we don't currently have any definition. And then, as I said, both states and LEAs need to ensure that these inequities are addressed and report on it. What are you doing in order to close? So for the state level, we currently have a set of strategies that is outlined in the public plan. It includes both licensure reform that we did, the staffing data collaborative strategies that we're implementing with some of the members participating here in this webinar, and then other strategies around professional development, support for teachers, data reporting, and others. We'll have to do the same both at the state and at the LEA level. Let me stop here for a second. We're going to open it up for discussion in a few minutes. But if there are questions about the law itself, and if there's something unclear around what are we required to do, I'm going to let you a minute to type it in the chat before I continue to talk a little bit more about the funding allocation in time. And again, we will go back to talk about equitable access in a minute, but if there are questions about the law itself. Okay, so I'll continue, and then we'll open up for discussion later. So a little bit about the allocation. The allocation formula changes, and it was previously 65% based on students below the poverty line, and 35% was based on the total student population, and that changes to 80-20 respectively. 80% will be based on students below the poverty line. So it's more weight to poverty rate than to total student population, and that of course changes the final amount that states and LEAs get. It applies both at the state and LEA level. Some states will get more, some states will get less. We have only one source that we were able to use so far, and there's some indication that DC may be getting more than it got before, but that's not something we can give you sort of a final answer about. But hopefully, if it is the case, and we will get more, it could in some ways compensate for LEAs who are getting less because of that new allocation. But I think it's still premature to kind of be able to give you concrete information about numbers, but you should know that it definitely changes, and you should expect a different formula as we move forward. What really stays the same, and actually we find more flexibility, is in the allowable use of funds for Title II, both at the state and at the LEA level, but I'll talk mostly about the LEA level. Basically, restrictions were removed, and more options were given, and that leads us to think that what you were using before, or what you were doing before, as far as the way you were using your Title II application, would most likely still be applicable under the new law. Of course, the new law gives us an opportunity to be more strategic about it and think about how we're using the funds, and we definitely want to do that. But in terms of compliance, we believe that your activities so far would continue to be allowable, because flexibility is generally increased. One change is that states can reserve additional 3% of the total Title II funds for activities to support school leadership. And we identified school leadership in the Plan for Equitable Access as probably the most important root cause of how can we attract, retain teachers at our highest need schools. So this is definitely something we're interested in thinking about together with you, whether that's something that we should do, whether we should think about leadership in those high need schools and exercise this option. And that's something we will be discussing. And then Title II is now emphasizing outcomes more than it did under No Child Left Behind. A little bit less on the inputs. There's a few places in the law where we can see that. The first and maybe the clearest one is the highly qualified teacher provision that is going away. There's no longer that requirement that you would only hire teachers that meet that pretty complicated formula that we are working with you every year to report on. That goes away, and that kind of leaves us the opportunity to decide for ourselves about what are proper qualifications for teachers in DC. It also connects to the out of field definition. We'll talk about that in a moment. But instead of that, ESSA says we got to focus on outcomes, not on those inputs like the bachelor degree or the certification, but what were the outcomes of those teachers and whether they're in the question of whether they're qualified or not. And when ESSA is discussing professional development and allowable professional development, it used to talk again about certain things that teachers have to do through professional development that is funded by Title II. It's no longer the case. Professional development now has to just be evidence-based. So we have to look at outcomes and see that it's actually working, and then it will be allowable. So more flexibility on that, but maybe more rigor in terms of looking at outcomes instead of the inputs. So I'd like to stop here and see if there are questions generally about the law. And then we will move to talk about the first topic, or three topics that we have emphasized: the Equitable Access Plan, the evaluation, teacher evaluation, state policy, and then finally the out-of-field or qualification policy. We'll do in-depth discussion about those three. But first, let me ask you if there are questions about the law in particular. Okay, so I see one question. Let me see. Sorry, I'm trying to understand the technology here. Is special education subgroup also being looked at in terms of achievement gaps and access to appropriate teachers? Yes. In two ways. So first of all, one of the things that are new with the regulations on equitable access is that we see them all across the ESSA law. Not just in Title II, not just in the section about teachers, but also in sections like accountability. And where a school is identified for a particular subgroup, and that includes students with disabilities or special education, what the LEA must do and the state must do is examine inequities in resource allocation, and the first and most important resource would be teachers. So schools that are identified as schools for targeted support, which was focus schools in the past, for that particular populations would have to check those gaps. But in addition, we would also be able to look, in our current version of the plan, we looked at those schools that are identified for priority and focus. Even though it was not part of the law, we decided that those deserve special attention. And we looked not only at gaps across poverty and minority, we also looked at gaps across students students in low-performing schools, meaning priority and focus, and then also across wards. We looked at the differences between Ward 7 and 8 and the other 6. So the answer is yes. There is a requirement to do it in the federal level, and there is also the option to look at it at the state level as well. Let's see if there was another question here. No, I think that's the only one. Okay, so feel free to add more questions in the chat box, and I'll address them as I'll see them. And we can start going a little bit more depth in the first key consideration. We call it which is the Equitable Access Plan, and particularly this new requirement to have it at the LEA level. And I'll explain why we're a little bit puzzled around how we're going to do that. The ESSA law says, and I'm quoting here, you can see it on the slide, local education agency will identify and address any disparities that result in low-income students and minority students being taught in higher rates than others by ineffective, inexperienced, and out-of-field teachers. Really resembles the state requirement. Currently, we have a state plan that was submitted and approved, but we didn't have guidance for LEA equitable access plans. Some other states did that in the first iteration a year or two ago. They took that requirement for the state and pushed it down to the LEAs and said the LEAs would develop their own equitable access plan. We kind of kept it at the state level because we believe, and as some members in the group that we had on October 18th said as well, that the majority of the problem is really at the city level. That a lot of the LEAs, particularly those that represent a single school, it's not where the gaps are. We know that students, as I said before, in Ward 7 and 8, the data shows us that they are disproportionately taught by inexperienced and ineffective teachers, regardless of the LEA. It's kind of an LEA blind gap. And that's why we kept it at the state level. But now that the law kind of asks us to have LEA plans, it leads us to think about that. And we want to ask you that. How should we treat this requirement? Some people have said we should talk to the department, explain the DC unique circumstances, and try to see how we can deal with it compliance-wise. Other people have mentioned, no, perhaps we should address it at the LEA and really have rigorous plans at the LEA level around attracting and retaining teachers. So I want to share a few things that came out in the focus group and then stop and get your take on that and see your comments on that. There you go. So LEA plans, they must include data and should include strategies, recruitment, retention, improving teacher effectiveness. That's the requirement. And then, as I mentioned, for single school LEAs that serve population that is high poverty, within LEA gaps, maybe not as relevant is what we had a comment from one LEA representative that said that, and we see that. OSSE, we currently provide LEAs the opportunity to join the staffing collaborative. And when we analyze the law requirements and what you get from that project, the staffing data collaborative, it seems like the project would help you in a great deal to meet that LEA requirement. So we're saying that to say participation in the project can really take you a long way in terms of meeting that compliance. And that can be a one way in which OSSE can support any LEAs in trying to meet that requirement. If you do not know the collaborative, it is an initiative through which we bring together, it was 21 LEAs in the first year. We're going to have around 35, 36 in the second year, so the majority of LEAs in DC, where we're kind of instead changing the data approach. Instead of multiple submissions to OSSE throughout the year, we've partnered with TNTP, that they get the data instead of OSSE, and what they do, they do an analysis of what correlates with retention and effectiveness for each participating LEA, and they send back the LEA report that give the LEA an analysis. Okay, these are the gaps that you have around retention or on effectiveness, and these are our recommendations based on the data that we've collected about particular preparation programs or compensation or licensure status, what's important for the retention and effectiveness of your teachers. So again, this goes a long way in kind of meeting the law requirement and at least provide significant help. And this could be one way which we could offer assistance, and that's something that came up in the meetings. Of course, then the question: what's going on? What's going to happen with LEAs that don't participate? And should we create an LEA template, or what kind of support can we offer you in order to meet this requirement that you have? So let me stop here and see if there are questions. Try to think both about generally the issue of equitable access, whether it's clear to you, whether you have a question about what are equitable access gaps, what is it that we have to measure, and whether you have questions or suggestions about the LEA plan and how should osse address this requirement for an LEA plan. All right, so I don't see a question. I'll give you another minute. Okay, so I'll continue. And if other questions comes up around that LEA requirement or on equitable access in general or about the staffing collaborative, feel free to put it in even as we continue. The second issue is teacher effectiveness and creating a definition. Again, the law says that each state should describe how low-income and minority students are not taught in disproportional rates by ineffective teachers, right? And we want to, since there is no federal teacher evaluation role and there are no federal guidance, comes the question, what do we do as a state? If we have to report on the difference in access to effective teachers between different types of students, what do we do when we don't have any definition or effectiveness or any guidance on that? Or should we have guidance on that? Well, before I get to the question of guidance, I want to also mention that last year we've added a new licensure pathway that relies on teacher evaluation. We said that teachers can be licensed if they have a track record of effectiveness, if we are seeing that they taught either in DCPS under temporary license and were effective, or in the charter sector and were effective through the charter teacher evaluation system or out of state. It really relies on effectiveness. And the question is, well, now we kind of have to maybe set some standard around effectiveness to make sure that there is meaning for what we did. Now that there is no federal guidance on that, what will we do as a state? So one thing to note is that I think there is agreement in the agency and with the LEAs. I don't think anyone at osse wants to do a state unified teacher evaluation model. I think we have a lot of successful teacher evaluation models that are being implemented in DC, and we want to keep that. We want to keep that diversity, and I think everyone recognizes that different LEAs have different are looking for different things with their teachers and want to have different ways to evaluate them. But should there be some minimum standards that we can make sure that at least in terms of rigor we are being consistent, even if the systems are different. We actually proposed minimum standards earlier in the year. I can actually show them to you, and you'll see how basic really they are. On the one hand, so it's really a five different components. First is that all LEAs have to have teacher evaluation system, which is actually not something that is in the law, and we think is very important. Second, that they should develop their teacher evaluation systems in consultation with educators. LEAs should have evaluation systems that are based on multiple measures and not just one, consistent with research on this issue. And that student learning metrics, including student growth and the state assessment, shall be included as a significant factor, which is much more flexible than where we were under the waiver, where we had particular weights that should have been. Now we're saying student growth as a whole, which should include some components of the state assessment, should be a significant factor. But the student growth doesn't have all to be around the state assessment. It could be something like what DCPS does. Some of it is the tasks, the student learning objectives, and some of it is the state assessment. But the student growth as a whole has to be a significant factor. And then finally, the evaluation systems allow for range of performances, so we won't have everyone being highly effective, but there's a particular range of performances. And we opened that up for kind of public comment, and we received some comments on that. It's consistent with DCPS's impact, so I think DCPS supported this, and then there were some other comments around whether it's consistent with charter laws, and we want to use this opportunity to open this question again. As this is a very important part of the transition to ESSA. Should we have state standard for teacher evaluation? I think that this is really aimed at LEAs that are either just opening or that haven't came a long way until today as far as teacher evaluation. This would be easy for LEAs that have done a lot until today to comply with, and I think within those five standards, you could have maybe 100 different types of teacher evaluation systems. But for LEAs that are still at the very beginning, would you think that it is important to have kind of a unified standard of rigor that would enable us to look at the access of ineffective teachers as the law requires us to do? So I invite you to comment. Even just a yes or no is fine. But also if you want to comment further, and I'll give you a minute to do so before I continue. And if you want me to go back to the standards, I can do that as well. So again, I think the question is, should there be a state level, a city level standard around what is the minimum for a teacher evaluation system in the spirit of what I've shared. Okay, so let's continue. Just to share you a little bit of what the comments that we got from the working group. Maybe it will inspire you. So the folks at the working group have said that LEAs would be able to meet the 5 criteria pretty easily. There may be some tweaking to current evaluation systems that are needed, but generally they said it should not be difficult to meet it. And there was general agreement that in some cases it will support the rigor evaluation systems, but participants really emphasized that the standards would not enable, force stronger evaluation systems necessarily. people in the working group have said that LEAs already have the incentive and want to evaluate their teachers, and really it should be about support, and it's not something that there is definitely a need for standards. Definitely with the majority of LEAs that are already doing teacher and leader evaluation systems. And LEAs are doing have emphasized that they vary, that different evaluation systems are different in their quality and in rigor. And then they also emphasize that the policy should not focus on requiring them to evaluate, but rather, again, to support them in doing so. And I think I think we're in complete agreement. I think right now what we're proposing is, again, this very minimum in terms of the standard for evaluation. But then coupled with that, I guess I didn't mention that, we also offer the state teacher evaluation model as a mean of support. So if you don't know how to do this, if you're a new LEA, if you don't have the resources like large LEAs in terms of how should I approach teacher evaluation, we invite you to work with us and implement a model that is research based, and we worked on with a group of LEAs to have here. So kind of coupling an approach of really increased flexibility, very, very minimum standards with an optional, more rigorous support for those who need it, those who want it. So I see a comment, yes, some LEAs may need more guidance than others in the area of teacher evaluations. Yeah, so that speaks exactly to what I'm suggesting. Again, kind of an approach that combines that more rigorous support for those who need it. And then those LEAs, and I see that some of them are with us today, that have come a long way with teacher evaluations and don't need us to tell you need to evaluate your teachers, and also maybe don't even need support, then the support is optional for you. I think that's what's great about the new law. It focuses on equity, which in DC is really where we're behind. We're not so much behind on teacher evaluation. We're seeing some nationally recognized best practices in teacher evaluation. I think DC is famous for that. But where we're possibly behind is ensuring that students that are low income or in Ward 7 and 8 or in schools with historically low performing have the same access for teachers, and that's where the law actually focuses. I think it's actually a pretty good law for DC. So let me read this other comment. It seems like it could prove a bit more difficult for schools who have multiple teachers in each classroom to be able to separate each teacher's impact and student outcomes. Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, one of the many, many reasons that teacher evaluations and teacher equity is such a difficult topic. And that's why we're really in the approach of joining together into unified effort to try and deal with it, and not really help you and help everyone comply with the law, but more importantly, think together about what we can do in order to close these gaps. This association of teachers to students is definitely something that is difficult. How are we evaluating teachers for non-tested grade and subjects is another area of difficulty. How do we look at issues like inequitable access within a school that sometimes exists is another difficulty. And it's something that we want to work together. I think we have a lot to offer in terms of support, both through the staffing collaborative and through the fact that osse has been working on this issue of equitable access kind of for 2 years now. So we have a little bit of 2 years of experience that we can offer some insights to you on. But I agree. I mean, this is a challenge, and it's something that we can work together with LEAs that have already been implementing this kinds of system for a while. Feel free, by the way, to contact me after the meeting, after this session, if you are interested in working with us, if you're interested in joining to the state teacher evaluation model, if you need additional support on that, or if you have follow-up questions, and I can make sure that we're starting a conversation on that. All right, let me see if there are So interestingly, we have multiple teachers with range of experience as part of our support and development of our more inexperienced teachers. They have model of more experienced teachers in the same room. Okay, yeah, I think, yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it goes back to the issue of inequitable access within a school that we know is a national problem. I don't want to say in DC, and I don't know, but many, many times when we look at schools, if you think even about the schools you've attended as a student, and think about that one very experienced, most effective teachers that everyone knows this is the best teacher, which class did she get or he get? The class that is hardest to teach or is easiest to teach? Which class did the first year teacher get? Sometimes it's the opposite of what we would want. Sometimes the first year teacher is the one that gets the difficult class, the more challenging class, the class that we actually want to support with the best teacher in the school. And I think your model that you're describing is fabulous, is fantastic, is exactly what we want to have. Teachers who are beginning teachers who are being supported. Okay, let me move forward to the next topic, which is I want to be conscious of time here. The definition of out of field. So just like ineffective, we also have to define out of field teachers because we have to report on gaps to out of field teachers. Now, as I said, ESSA removed the HQT requirements on this issue. And so currently there is no federal policy on teacher qualifications and what is out of field teachers, and we have to decide. Going back to the licensure regulations, we added that licensure pathways that is based on effectiveness. So maybe there's an opportunity to do something similar on out of field, and looking at teachers who are effective instead of those inputs is where I think I'm implying with this. And then the staffing collaborative study showed us that qualifications really matter for teachers in their first 3 years of teaching. So again, going back to that point where it leads us to think, should we maybe require those inputs for teachers who are entering the field and then look at outcomes for more experienced teachers? Is that a place we should go? I know there was a lot of criticism around the highly qualified teachers' burdensome reporting requirements. Should we do something more simple around who can teach in DC? Should there be regulations at all about this issue? If there won't be regulations, are we opening ourselves to more inequities where in one part of the city we'll have teachers who are in field and in other out of field? These are kind of the questions that we want to ask. And the same for inexperienced teachers. It may look like a simpler question, but that's also something we gotta answer. So I guess that the question I wanna ask you guys is whether we should be thinking, or I guess we have to think, we are required to think about and define what is an out-of-field teacher. So how would you like to see it? Would you like to look at inputs? Would you like to look at outcomes? Would you like to follow what we did in the licensure pathways? Just very quickly, those that were in the working group last week said that they're more interested in strategies for improving teacher pipeline than osse kind of defining what is a highly qualified teacher, and going back again to that comment about effectiveness and about the incentives for LEAs. LEAs were saying we already want to have teachers who are in field. How are we going to be supported in order to have teachers that are in field? How are we going to solve this issue of teacher shortage is what we're mostly interested, rather than how are we complying with this out of field definition. So let me throw this back to you, this question of inputs versus outcomes, this question of looking at teachers who are entering the field as opposed to teachers who are already teaching for some time. How should we have a different definition of out of field for both teachers? So let me pause here for a second, see if there are comments or questions about that and about how osse should address that as we write the state plan. Dustin, I know John just replied to you privately, but also just to add, we are happy to support the way you are defining your gaps, and see if you have that kind of influence of an experienced teacher in a classroom, how could that play out when we look at when you look at your LEA and gaps in trying to solve them, to make sure that that you know it's taken into account. I want to be conscious of time, and I want to finish on time. Just to mention also that participants have said that improving effectiveness comes with improving professional development plans, and they would like to talk about that. There was also this point about, very important point about inexperienced teachers that needs extra professional development, and that takes time and money. And let me move on. And then again, many of participants talks about outcomes that are more important than the actual qualifications. And the licensure pathway was pointed as something that is important. There's still room for improvement there, but is a good kind of starting point for how we think about qualifications as well. But everyone kind of were in agreement that we should be moving towards outcome-focused approach as opposed to inputs, and think about teacher effectiveness, even in the sense of out of field for experienced teachers, those that have effectiveness data, as opposed to looking at those inputs. I want to stop right here and see if there are final questions before getting to some final. I think it may be useful to indicate if inexperienced teachers have relevant technical experience, especially for STEM or CTE. We find that in some cases, the teachers who have relevant experience haven't necessarily taught before. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it gets to the issue that before pre-service, what we have really are those inputs, and we would like to see what inputs we have. Do they have teaching certificates? Are they able to teach in our classroom? Once they're in service, we're able to look at their credentials as teachers and see if they're the right people to serve in our classrooms. And currently, we weren't looking at that, and that's an opportunity to move towards that. As an out-of-field inexperienced teacher is defined by the state, it should also include support through professional development. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's completely consistent with what people are saying. Don't focus on the compliance. We already want to have in-field teachers. We already want to have effective teachers. Focus your state efforts on support. And professional development is definitely something we want to look at and make sure that it's aimed to those that need it the most. And I think that could be an amazing step forward that we can be doing. We should really finish, but the discussion is not over. It's really the beginning, and as I said, you should continue and should feel free to contact me if you have follow-up questions, particularly about the webinar. But there are other opportunities to do so. For example, there are 2 surveys that are out for you to participate. You can find them in the osse website. Before I continue, let me tell you, Google osse ESSA, and the first result that will come up is the ESSA webpage that would send you to all these resources. But what you can take is a measure survey that really touches about the accountability measures, and the input is being I'm telling you, very seriously considered here at osse. So I urge you to participate. And then a more general survey that helps us understand from you your vision around education and improvement. The survey is available, and we really want you to participate in it. In terms of upcoming engagements, so we have the focus group on a proposed accountability framework, which would be on Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. And you are welcome to register, as well as the recap of proposed accountability framework webinar that will follow that 2 days later. And then we would also be presenting this work and the ideas and the questions in the DCPS principal meetings to make sure we have sufficient principal participation. All of these things that I've mentioned, again, are available in the ESSA webpage that you can find very easily. This is where you'll find the registration link. And again, I urge you to participate. And we want your opinion and we want your take, because we believe that the field, that you guys should be the ones that inform our policy and not vice versa. So please participate. And for the sake of your time, and I want to respect your time, we'll finish it up here. Again, feel free to follow up questions, and I really hope to see you in upcoming engagements and throughout the process of this new state plan that will hopefully be completed in March. Thank you very much for participating, and goodbye.